What? How do I get my channel? There we go.
Were discovered. A tragedy like this was unheard of in Akron, not only because of the facts that there was now an arsonist on the loose, but because no one knew who his next victim would be. Because as it turns out, Lindell and Gloria were only 2 of his 9 victims to come. The hunt for this masked murderer was on, and soon enough, detectives had a lead. During the night this fire occurred, the suspect had fled in this direction immediately after his second attempt. This meant that whoever this was lived in this general vicinity, and considering this, the very first suspect would be Stanley Ford. Stanley was a peculiar man. He often claimed to be a guardian sent by God and would spend his days sleeping so he could stay awake at night to watch over the neighborhood. Additionally, Stanley was also Lindell's neighbor, and the two had spent many years living next to each other. This is why officers were certain that Stanley would react with sorrow when informed of Lindell's death. But when a call was made telling him of the tragedy, something was off.
I was calling to follow up with you about the fire across the street. You know, because of the tumultuous history that you and the people in Lindell's house had, everybody is thinking you, right?
No, Tanisha, listen to me once again. I do not mess with these people up here. Them guys try to get me to come on and engage with them. Them guys was nasty. They had prostitutes in and out all night. They was dealing with homosexuality. Them people was just bad people. I didn't do nothing to them people. Them people was just mean. I mean, listen here. When they moved up here, Tanisha, they stole everything that wasn't
Mr. Ford, this is my concern.
What's your
Is
concern?
that how to make people believe that it wasn't you.
Tanisha, you either take my word or you don't. That's all I can tell you.
Well, we do have another option.
What's that?
The polygraph.
Suspiciously, not only did Stanley refuse a polygraph test, but officers believed his reaction to be endorsing Lindell's death rather than mourning it. This was likely because of a low in the two's relationship that stemmed from their arguments about property boundaries and maintenance. However, in all fairness, this case was not limited to Lindell alone. In fact, Stanley was infamous for often disputing with neighbors when it came to property boundaries. All things considered, Stanley was only seen as a weird and obnoxious neighbor rather than someone who would burn a house down. For now, at least, he was not the most prominent suspect, as detectives began to believe that the one responsible for this fire may have been someone inside Lindell's house. The night the fire occurred, Lindell and Gloria were not the only ones in the house. Thomas Hugley and Garrett were two of Lindell's friends who were going through tough times due to financial constraints. Lindell was kind enough to offer the two of them a place in the basement of his home. Fortunately, Thomas escaped before the fire could swallow up the basement, but Garrett, on the other hand, just so happened to be somewhere else that night. By April 22nd, 2016, Akron detectives would call in Garrett for an interview to find out what...
Wow. I'm not gonna know why it's still bothering.
really happened.
First, let me say that I hate having to put you out there like that. Like all
That was terrible. I like what that happened. Hey,
you guys, that's my first night. But I was worried because they said you lived down there, and I hadn't seen or heard from you, so I waited.
yeah, I was there earlier that day because I was over my auntie's house doing a job for her.
What's her name?
Shit. Michael Williams. I forgot her last name. She works across the street, that's it.
Okay. Now, I ain't trying to, stir your brain. There's a main reason I want to find you. Make sure, one, that you safe and you okay. And if
I didn't know nothing about it until my sister then called me. And Mr. Hughley called me.
And what they say?
They said the house burned down. But they didn't tell me nothing about nobody got hurt in there. And then my best friend,
For detectives, it is definitely odd that Garrett is taking so long to remember the finer details, but this is nothing conclusive as of now. However, they are confident that by poking deeper, they might be able to find some clues.
Have you heard about anybody who got a beef with him?
no, that I know of.
Now, what was that thought you just had?
That was that I know of. Nobody I know of right off the head.
Say the truth. It seems like you're choking on the truth right
I said, I don't know offhand because I didn't know the people he knew.
now. It's obvious you just had a thought. Do you just not want to speak because all of us in here, or
No,
you not want to speak because you're at the police station? You definitely had a thought right there.
all I know is that they reported a restraining order that guy across the street. Stand something, that's all I knew.
Stanley's name has once again crept into the conversation. In fact, rumors about Lindell and Stanley's conflicts had already spread like wildfire, and he was on his way to becoming suspect number one. But for detectives, this could mean anything. Stanley would alternatively be the most suitable for Garrett to pin his crimes on, a neighbor with a god complex who had frequent conflicts with Lindell. Furthermore, Garrett has not given any details about his alibi. All we know is that during the night of the fire, he was at his aunt's house and was spending time with his niece. This is why detectives would not let up putting pressure on Garrett.
You're the only person that ain't even gave a scenario. And that kind of made me suspicious of anything that you might have heard or thought. You're the only one.
But I don't know nothing.
Oh, Crisis. What? What? Wow, it's the real one. That's really interesting. I just saw you upload a video earlier today. I saw you upload Congregation. I was like, wow, he's back to playing. Also, hello, Tish. Yeah, I'm still doing start pause runs. I don't know, like I neglected playing the ending a bit, and now I'm getting screwed by the last and the second wave, because I was like, oh yeah, I'm persistent at them, so I played them. I would do them like once a day, and I was like, okay, it's fine. But now I'm getting screwed by them, so that was perhaps a poor choice. Should probably be playing them until I'm consistent at them. Let me just... There we go. It's pretty silent at this point, I'd agree. I don't know what I'm doing with the support level. It like every stream I do, the level looks worse somehow. I'm still dying to the easiest things. Yeah, I shouldn't be dying to the big wave parts in this wave anyway, and I'm dying to the big wave parts. I shouldn't be dying at that 1.25 there either. I don't know what my issue is. Now, like, what is that? That should be undiable, but I'm dying to it. The noobliest players, unfortunately. Yes, it is getting decorated eventually, hopefully, maybe. Should have been done by now, but when we were like getting people for the decoration, I was like, oh yeah, you have time, it's gonna take me a while to verify it anyway. And now it's been like 2.5 months since I've started playing the level. Right? August, September, it's been 3 months since I started playing the level. And now I'm like, hey, we should probably finish up the deco, you know. I've just been playing wave challenges recently instead, because it's, I don't know. It's probably a better idea to just play wave challenges at this point. Nine. Good to know you've been watching them. Yeah, like, I don't know. I'm surprised half the time when I'm looking at like what I'm doing, because I've been buffing it like, I've been buffing it for a good while now, and every time I like look back and I'm like, wow, this looks so easy in comparison to what I'm playing now. And I remember like when I started playing it again, like 3-4 months ago, whenever, I was initially gonna do my old version, and I thought that looked impossible. I was like, this is silent, like... And now I'm playing this version and I feel the same way as I did back then. Like, it doesn't feel any more silent, it just feels like... I don't know. Feels weird. Anyway, I'm getting extremely unlucky for the 10th completion as usual. There we go. Yeah, I'm playing it both for fun and just for the sake of playing it, because I do actually... Oh my god, that was bad. Because I do actually want to verify it. Like, I'm only making it as hard as I can without, like, it becoming unfun. I'm still having fun playing the level, so... I don't think there's much issue with it yet. Although there are some places I'm looking at changing because of inconsistencies that shouldn't be existing, because I just have a bad click pattern or something. Or I just learned the part incorrectly. Or I just don't have the skill to do a certain thing. Like, for example, this click right before the gravity portal, I always seem to go so early there for no reason, and it kills me so often. And it's getting a bit annoying. Really? I died to the cube? I died to nothing. Wow. That was bad. That was so bad. I should have died like 20 times there. Unlucky. The spam is another thing that kills me often, and the double click at the beginning of the third wave. Those three spots kill me a ton for no reason when they just shouldn't. I don't know what's up with that. Bro, I swear the cube kills me more often than the waves. Oh my god, I'm so noob. Oh, you mean 56? Yeah. Let me just change this to 10 because I don't forget it. What do you mean can't imagine that happening to 76? Like, can't imagine me changing it up? If yes, then, like, obviously, I would never change it. Like, it's... At this point, it's so ingrained into my muscle memory that there's no reason to replace it. Also, it's like the hardest part in the level, so replacing it would just giga nerf the level. I don't know, this is like the SC66P of Cozy, except it's like not as hard as SC66P. At least I assume it's not. I don't know. It does have... I don't know. They're not double clicks, they're just micro releases, right? So... If you're better... Oh my god, that was bad that though. If you're better at... If you're better at double clicks than micro releases, you're gonna find SC66P easier. If you're better at... And if you're better at micro releases, you're gonna find this easier. Like, I don't know. It's that type of thing, I guess. But like, you need to be good at micro releases anyway if you're doing double clicks, so I guess it's just generally harder. What did Jack say? Wow. Yeah, I really have to practice the first third of the wave. I don't know. I seem to be dying to it all over the place for no reason. Well, that was 2 deaths. Technically 2 deaths. Technically 5, whatever. Because I died to 4 spikes in one, so that was 2 deaths technically. Two deaths and I can't do it. Bro, come on. I actually did this upside down section with Invisible Player yesterday. Like most of it at least. And I thought it was the craziest thing ever. And then I had a dream today that like it's normally like invisible, like your player is invisible in this section. I thought like, what the fuck is going on in my dreams, bro? I'm just... Yeah, okay. Plants vs. Zombies. Wow. I should edit this before I forget. Oh. It's a mouse. I don't know what to tell you, I soft click. What? That's 61 times. I'm doing 69 to 100. I just realized, Excel Spiral, is that the same person who made Amalgam? It is! Ooh, somehow I never realized this. I forgot. I have bad long-term memory, unfortunately. Bro. There we go. That's 10. And I died like an idiot, as usual. Okay, how long did that take? 40 minutes. Okay, that's not that bad. What was even that? That was the worst spam in the universe. Nice. I haven't been keeping count and I already forgot the numbers anyway. How long have I been playing? 6 minutes for that part. Nice. What do you mean, what's this all exactly? It's just super buffed Cosmic Cyclone. Thank you. Okay. My entire hand started slipping. Like, what the fuck was that? Oh my god, bro. That's just stupid. Ugh. Easier said than done, buddy. Okay, why is my hand slipping? What's going on? Why is it so slippery? My mousepad is so slippery right now for no reason. Alright.
You aren't there, but you're the only one. All right, let's do it this way. The day of the fire, the night it happened. I was at my niece's house. What time did you get there? I don't know. What time did I get there? Was it light outside or was it dark? I don't know. Well, it was dusk. What can I say? We was. Who were you with? Me and my niece. And what time did you leave there? The next day, I think. What time did the fire happen? I don't know. Thomas told me it was 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't know. Let me ask you this question. Was you going to the funeral today? Yes. Yes. You know what time it is? It's probably 10 o'clock. That's what it said. I'm gonna say this. I'm just gonna go on straight with you. But the gut feeling I got is that you have some names swirled in your head. You just don't want to give them because you don't want to give them. No, I don't. Right. I don't know people. You might not socialize with your people. Need your help. We're asking for your help. I know. I understand that. I just don't really know much, man. They protected me from on the football field. They had me. I had to be down. And they made it happen for me. They said, we ain't gonna get down. Oh my God. It was good times.
For detectives, this was perplexing. A suspect that was willing to cry for his dead friend and housemate yet had no solid story for where he was on that day created a contradicting situation. No matter what, detectives cannot be certain that Garrett is the arsonist, so they would slowly push him towards polygraph tests, claiming it's the only way to prove his innocence.
Yeah, okay. I'll call you. No, it's his schedule. It's his schedule. We're gonna bring you in here. He's got a schedule with you. Set up an appointment. Oh my God. You know, fuck that. Fuck how it gets. Listen, man. We're trying to help here. We're not I know. If I can help them, I will. I swear to God, I will. Well, you need to just come off your chest and let us know something that you know. You would feel a whole lot better that you're our key to the information about who's Why not putting it on me? I wasn't
Because you lived in the house for 2 years.
Yeah, but I was never there. I was
And you're saying that you don't know or have heard anything about
Yeah, I was not. I haven't been here long enough to hear
the
this.
car fire that happened in 2013 and you were in the house. You have no clue of who may have started saying nobody gave any names. No scenarios, no theories, no nothing.
It's just a thought.
I mean, that just goes on and on.
How hard is this even?
Even though Garrett just agreed to the polygraph, just moments later, he would have second thoughts.
That's pretty open.
They're saying you want to take a polygraph. Well, take a polygraph anyway. You just said you would. You want to. Let me take
It's pretty open.
I didn't say that. I said you could. I said I would. I said I would if I needed to. What's coming down to a need? All right. Yes, sir.
Yes, it is.
Okay. You want to talk to the sergeant here. He'll explain things. Is this something that you want to do? Is take a polygraph? No, I can't. That seemed perfect. Why did they want to question that?
Any new summoning salt video? New. This. I was like 90% to watching this.
Sponsoring this video. Pond says he has a plain water experiment. Parker, likely fearing that he might get sued, later tried to deny that he said any such thing, despite his interview being recorded. Given Pond's tendency to stick Gary Triggs on people, he was probably right to do it.
MIT is used to being right on top of every scientific discovery just as it happens. That increases their frustration.
But his reasons to suspect fraud seem to be justified, thanks to a tip from a colleague, Richard Petrasso. Petrasso had stumbled onto a highly suspicious piece of data in his case. In his eyes, cold fusion was a ridiculous claim. It was, quote, just glib bullshit as far as we know. The only piece of evidence that made him remotely interested was the gamma ray spectrum. Fusion was supposed to emit neutrons. That much you know now. Because they were short on Pons, Pons and Fleischmann borrowed a low-sensitivity neutron dosimeter. All this detector could do was count neutrons. They don't tell you anything about where those neutrons came from. If we could measure the energy of those neutrons, we could be far more certain they're coming from fusion. And so, we want to look for gamma rays. Gamma rays are high-energy photons, typically emitted by a radioactive source. By measuring all the gamma rays in a lab, you can plot them on an energy spectrum. It will have a sloping background level with lots of distinct peaks jutting up. Each peak is associated with well-known energy levels. This peak at 1.46 MeV, for instance, comes from radioactive potassium, which is present in the environment and also your body. Same with this peak at 2.62 MeV, which comes from radioactive thallium. There is also a peak that can prove fusion is occurring. When a neutron is emitted into a water bath, it will gradually slow down until it collides with a proton and become captured by it. This emits a gamma ray, and its energy level is extremely precise. It is 2.224 MeV with very little wiggle room. A gamma ray from fusion should look like this, a peak at exactly 2.224. And in the paper published by Pons and Fleischmann, that's exactly what you see. A peak in almost the exact right spot. Except there was an earlier draft of this graph. In both their submissions to the Journal of Electroanalytic Chemistry and Nature, they had submitted a graph peak way to the right at 2.5 MeV. There is no relevant radiation phenomena that occurs at 2.5. It is just straight up the wrong value. Pons and Fleischmann might have realized this if they had asked even just one colleague in U of U's physics department. Indeed, if the Journal of Electroanalytical Chemistry hadn't rushed the peer review process, they would have sent it out to a reviewer with knowledge of nuclear physics, who would have caught this problem and likely rejected the paper. Ultimately, though, the graph with 2.5 was never made public, because on March 28th, Fleischmann was giving a talk in the UK at Harwell Labs, and the audience members there immediately recognized the peak as a mistake. Later that day, he told Pons over the phone, and Pons then submitted a new graph where the peak moved to 2.22. Not just that, though. The y-axis had been scaled from 20,000 down to 2,200. Just 10% of what it used to be. In the facts he sent to Nature, he did not explain the reason for this correction. This, of course, is all behind the scenes, not public knowledge. When the paper was eventually published, the only hint that something had changed is that an equation still had 2.5 in it. Without knowing that the graph had been changed, people thought this was just a typo. Richard Petrasso initially thought the same, but fortunately for him, he happened to have friends who worked with Nature who had seen the original graph, and they let him know that the peak had changed. Now, Petrasso thinks that there is something highly suspicious there.
There we go.
But beyond...
Ugh. How did that take? 1 hour, 3 minutes. That's good.
The new graph had other problems. For one, it was far too zoomed in. Sure, there may be something at 2.22, but unless you can see the full range of energies, you can't tell if it's a signal or if it's noise. The shape of the peak also looked weird. It's about half as wide as it should be. And there are distinct features that were missing to the left of the peak. There should be a slope known as the Compton edge. And even further left, there should be a bump known as the first escape peak. The Pons and Fleischmann graph lacked both of those. Petrasso wondered if there was a copy of the full spectrum somewhere. Luckily for him, Pons and Fleischmann had let a bunch of Utah news stations come in and film their lab. And so, he went and scoured every news clip he could find until he found a clip from CNN. In it was a computer screen with the full spectrum. Because he knows exactly where the peaks for potassium and thallium should be, Petrasso was able to scale the rest of the spectrum. And lo and behold, when he looked for the so-called fusion peak, it was at 2.5 and not 2.22. Petrasso began phoning people at U of U to get more info. He even sent a student to Salt Lake City just to see if any more news channels had more footage. Marvin Hawkins confirmed to Petrasso that the peak was originally measured at 2.5. But he wasn't the only person who backed that up. Pons had needed help with the gamma ray measurements, and so he had asked a medical radiation physicist named Robert Hoffman to perform them. In fact, Hoffman, just like Hawkins, had his name left off the paper at the last minute, a move that felt like a personal slight. After the press conference, Hoffman refused to work with Pons and Fleischmann ever again. Hoffman later ran some new tests and came to the conclusion that an issue with the preamplifier in the circuit caused artifacts in his spectrum. He wrote a letter on April 27th to Pons where he stated that there was no evidence for anything at 2.2 and that the 2.5 peak was an artifact. He was essentially retracting his data from their paper despite being left off as an author. Petrasso was outraged. With no explanation, Pons and Fleischmann appeared to have fabricated a critical piece of evidence. He began to write a paper lambasting them, which he would later submit to Nature. He was reportedly so angry about this, the original draft of his letter was so emotional, he needed a colleague to help him tone it down. Nature will reach out to Pons for comment, and after he doesn't reply for weeks, they give him a deadline. His response was apparently so volatile, Nature declined to publish it. Petrasso's paper is published on May 18th. It will be a crushing blow to Pons and Fleischmann's credibility, an indisputable smoking gun. Gary Triggs will later attempt to block the paper, but this amounts to little more than idle threats. But Petrasso's paper wouldn't matter. That's one of the ironies of this story. Scientists knew just how damning the gamma rays were, but to the media, it was just one of a dozen other criticisms flying around. Really, the media only paid attention an entire year later, when a book by Frank Close exposed behind-the-scenes shenanigans, and he heavily implied fraud, or at least as far as UK libel law allowed him to.
So I then spoke to Marvin Hawkins, the graduate student, and he didn't know either. And I said, let's get this straight. I said, it's clear that the peak was measured at 2.5. There are 4 people involved in this experiment. Fleischmann doesn't know how it's moved. Hoffman doesn't know how it's moved. Now you're telling me that you don't know how it's moved. And he said, I think you've got the picture now.
But by that point, it didn't matter. Cold fusion had been dead for a year.
5 laboratories have successfully repeated the experiment. 6 others have failed.
Tonight, other scientists at MIT and elsewhere are saying they have evidence suggesting there was no fusion.
For now, at least, the skeptics seem to outnumber the believers in the San Francisco Bay Area, where so many top-ranked scientists work.
And a Duke scientist says the problem with Pons and Fleischmann's work is that it amounts to sloppy science versus reproducible science. 2 groups of scientists at the University of Michigan announced today that they have found no evidence to confirm claims of a fusion reaction.
But back here in this country, a spokesman for the Los Alamos labs is denying earlier reports that scientists there were close to repeating the experiment.
Weeks earlier, lab after lab announced they had confirmed part of cold fusion. But by now, just as many labs had declared the exact opposite. They couldn't see enough neutrons, tritium, or any gamma rays. For physicists, any of those 3 would be the gold standard proof of fusion, and yet they did not see them. But for chemists, the most compelling piece of evidence had always been the calorimetry, the heat. After all, we go all the way back to 1985, we have the original piece of evidence that was so convincing, so unambiguous, that it swayed both Pons and Fleischmann into believing they had seen something nuclear. The mythical meltdown. A 1 centimeter cube of palladium had melted and left a hole in the lab bench and concrete. They could think of no chemical reaction that could cause so much damage, produce so much heat. It had to be nuclear. But the thing is, no one actually witnessed the event itself. All we know is that the cube melted. By this point, plenty of theories have been put forward that weren't so mythical. If you have a partially enclosed container that is slowly being filled with oxygen and hydrogen gas, and a bunch of it leaks out of the palladium all at once, all you'd need was a rogue spark, and you'd go up like the Hindenburg. And as we saw before, at least 2 labs, Livermore in California, North Carolina U, called off their experiments because they had explosions. And their conclusions were that they had accidentally caused traditional chemical explosions. Nothing nuclear about it. Pons and Fleischman have said repeatedly they could not think of a single non-nuclear explanation for the heat that they saw. They'd had 5 years to ponder this issue. Maybe they just lacked imagination. Even besides the meltdown, Pons and Fleischman said that they had seen 300% excess heat. 4 watts out for every 1 watt in. It was those numbers that made the news. Those numbers that convinced the world the era of fossil fuels may come to an end far sooner than expected. But there was at least one chemist, one electrochemist in fact, who seriously doubted those numbers as well. Nathan Lewis was a 33-year-old professor at Caltech, with a solid reputation among his peers, especially for his age. Chuck Martin, a friend of both him and Stanley Pons, said, quote, "I'm not as young as Nate, and nobody's as smart as Nate." He called him, quote, "one of the most fiercely competitive son of a bitches you'll ever meet." On March 23rd, when cold fusion was announced to the world, Chuck Martin had phoned Lewis's wife and frantically told her to report it on CNN. Nate absolutely needed to see this. Lewis's group at Caltech had been trying to replicate cold fusion since day one. Initially, Lewis let his postdocs do most of the work, as at first he was highly skeptical. He told them they were allowed at most a single day. But after talking to some peers and hearing more about Pons and Fleischman, he figured maybe there was something to this. Quote, "They're a little flaky, but they're not crazy. I don't know what to think." What really got him interested was talking to a Caltech physicist named Steve Koonin, who told him about the extremely similar work by Steve Jones at BYU, who was known to be a fusion expert. The scandalous backstory there wasn't public yet, so to Lewis, this seemed like two groups independently stumbling onto the same thing. And so he directed his group to try and take a real crack at this thing. As the frenzy around cold fusion grew, Lewis's team grew to 15 chemists and physicists working side by side. Their neutron detector was around 100,000 times more sensitive than the one used in the Utah work. But they could only do so much when the paper lacked experimental details. There was no calibration data for the calorimeter. In fact, the paper didn't list even a single temperature reading. It only reported results in terms of watts of power. Lewis had personally emailed Pons asking for more info, even just a preprint of the paper. Pons called him and was friendly, but said he'd have to wait for a copy. Lewis asked for anything, just anything he could give him, and Pons only gave him a cryptic warning. Quote, "Be careful. You've had explosions. I don't want you to hurt yourself. I want you to be careful." As for what to avoid, Pons only offered this: avoid high current and sharp edges. Lewis and his group would have to push forward using their best guesses. Weeks go by and they see nothing, and through the grapevine, they hear about some folks at MIT who think the gamma ray data is highly suspect. Lewis is convinced that this has all been a wild goose chase.
This is the Caltech cold fusion group, which of course was one of the major anti-groups.
But even at this point, he wasn't willing to go public against it yet. Steve Koonin had invited him to speak at the upcoming American Physical Society meeting in Baltimore. This was going to be the physics equivalent of the Woodstock-level meeting in Dallas. Lewis initially declined the offer, but one night, he stayed up late to watch the congressional hearing on C-SPAN. It was there he saw the University of Utah ask for $25 million for unproven research. And it was also where Fleischman divulged a piece of information that had not been public before. A comment so innocuous that no one in the room caught its significance. But Lewis did. And it was so offensive that he decided he couldn't sit back anymore. He phoned Steve Koonin back. He was going to speak in Baltimore, after all. Dallas had managed to attract 7,000 chemists into a basketball arena. APS in Baltimore would manage just 2,000. It is no Woodstock, and some likened it more to a political convention. But it will still go down as the stuff of legends. Steve Koonin gave one of the more memorable talks, and he had a dry sense of humor that played well on TV. Quote, "One could theorize about how pigs would behave if they had wings, but pigs don't have wings." He had been running computer simulations to see just how likely it was that deuterium would fuse at room temperature. He found that even with a deuterium ball the same size as the sun, only one fusion was likely to occur in an entire year. To end his talk, he did not mince words.
Theoretically, I would say that the BYU results are dubious, but not impossible. My conclusion is that the current situation is gloomy, but not yet terminal, and one needs a few more sensitive experiments to decide what's going on. Let me then turn to the Utah.
Okay, that was a really good run. Oh, hey, Virtual. Hey, Semi-Space. Ugh. I've been playing for so long that for a second I just thought my monitor was falling over for no reason. Nice. Okay, that was true. Time 122. Awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Nice. That's one.
My conclusion, based on my experience, my knowledge of nuclear physics, and my intuition, is that the experiments are just wrong. and that we're suffering from the incompetence and perhaps delusion of Doctors Pons and Fleischman.
Now, by the standards of an academic conference, Koonin had dropped the ball. But this was still a toned-down version of what he'd wanted to say. The Caltech lawyers had told him that whatever he did, he couldn't use the word fraud. He had warmed up the crowd, and they were hungry for the killing blow. In Koonin's words, if he had hit a triple, then Lewis was about to hit a home run.
Well, Steve, you really shook him up. Steve knows something about the experiments I'm going to tell you about, so he's a little justified. There are two pieces of news. One, I'm a chemist. Two, I'm an objective scientist.
He starts out with the questions many in the audience had been asking. Where are the neutrons? Where is the tritium? He also gets a small jab in about the gamma rays.
We never saw anything above the background. And to prove that to you, I'll show you the foreground, and I'll show you the whole spectrum, not just one peak. And you see that we basically, if anything, see a little bit of negative peak in the 2.2 region.
But soon, he moved on to the real issue in his area of specialty, the calorimetry, the heat.
Let's turn to heat. Heat is confusing to almost everyone, including almost all of my electrochemical friends, and I will try to walk you through this and you will be shocked. Guaranteed.
Calorimetry is not as simple as pumping in electricity and seeing the change in the water's temperature. You need to measure how fast the water is heating up. Accurate calorimetry needs a closed system. You have a box, and you make sure no heat is entering or leaving that box without being accounted for. Notably, the Pons and Fleischmann cells were open-topped, and since electrolysis of heavy water generates deuterium and oxygen gas, it's fair to assume that not all of it will be absorbed by the palladium, and some of it may escape the cell into the rest of the lab. Now, this is not inherently flawed as a setup. In fact, compared to a closed cell, this is a much safer design that reduces the risk of explosions. As long as you're keeping track of the gases leaving the cell, your calculations can still be accurate. But Lewis argued that Pons and Fleischmann's math only worked out if you assumed that 100% of the gases escaped. However, in reality, some percentage of the gases will recombine back into the water, injecting small bursts of heat into the system. Lewis argued they had no way to prove that wasn't happening. Another flaky assumption was that the temperature in the cell was uniform. Lewis argued that the cells could easily have hot and cold spots. Even something as simple as stirring or using multiple thermometers would help eliminate potential errors. Lewis gets a major laugh when he explains how his team got the dimensions for the fusion cell.
We built an exact cell as best we could from all the press photos that we had of the Pons-Fleischmann cell. We measured the ratio of their wrist to their arm and got a good scale in. And we built the cell.
But by far the biggest bomb dropped during Lewis's presentation was the realization he had while watching Pons and Fleischmann on C-SPAN.
Where do these last numbers come from? The 4 to 1 and 10 to 1. By the way, these last two numbers, the biggest two, are calculated in error even by their own formulas. This 1224 should really be only 306, and this 286 should really be 143. But that's not the real part. If you read the congressional record, and you look on C-SPAN, I told them that we knew this, and they didn't reply to me.
It is this moment right here.
One of the results which I'll show you, one of the sets of calculations which I'll show you on the next slide, and is really a hypothetical energy release. I'd stress that because it involves the recalculation of our data.
And he said it so casually, so quickly before moving on to another point, that no one caught what he meant. But he had just admitted the heat value, the 1 watt in and 4 watts out, weren't measured directly. They were theoretical.
But Fleischmann pointed out, if you read it very closely, that the third column numbers were hypothetical, and he knew that we knew that. So he did point it out for the first time in public last Wednesday.
They had measured a palladium rod that was 1.25 centimeters long. But through some scaling process they did not explain, they extrapolated this result to a 10 centimeter long rod. So in their extrapolation, they could get 300% excess heat, but their average measured value was only 27%. Obviously, that's still in the green, but compared to 300%, this was a much, much smaller number, which meant there is plenty of room for error in the calorimetry.
And instead of dividing it by the total power in, they divided it by an imaginary quantity. The current times an assumed voltage, half a volt. Not the voltages they measured, just the voltage they assumed. All of these were this numerator divided by this fixed, arbitrarily chosen voltage. And so those numbers in the third column were scaled based on this arbitrary choice of half a volt. And that's where the 4 to 1 to 1 reported in the paper come from. I just want to make sure that that's clear. We have no evidence of neutrons. We have no evidence of gamma rays above background. We have no evidence for helium production at reasonable rates. We have no evidence for ambient helium, for helium above ambient. We have no evidence for any excess enthalpy in our measurements.
As soon as he finishes, the applause is roaring. It lasts an entire minute. Lewis himself said that he felt like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Lewis had spoken quickly and with confidence, and he had plenty of quits to share with the media.
This experiment hasn't been reproduced by any national laboratory or any university yet without a good football team.
The Lewis talk was so devastating that around half the audience left the conference immediately after. An organizer tried to get them back to work, meaning they had more talks to listen to. One person shouted back, "We are getting back to work." Pons and Fleischman, despite an extended invitation, declined to attend Baltimore. They were right to avoid it. An editor for Nature, David Lindley, called the conference, quote, "a hanging party lacking only its intended victims." Notably, Steve Jones did accept an invitation. If you remember, it was an abstract he had submitted to APS in February mentioning cold fusion that had kicked off this entire chain of events. By now, his set of talking points was locked in. His dollar versus the national debt. The flower growing versus the tree. He'd also taken the time to practice some limericks, poking fun at Pons and Fleischman.
Last night upon the stair, I saw a man who wasn't there. He wasn't there again today. Oh, how I wish he'd go away.
I have no idea what this means. The rehearsed nature of his talking points helped to cover up the fact that he was extremely stressed from all the public attention and criticism. He was still being accused of stealing the idea, and was no doubt covering his bases with BYU's lawyers. One reporter from the LA Times said that Jones had lost 13 pounds in the past few weeks from stress. Still keen to assert himself as the rational cold fusion discoverer, at a panel of 9, including himself, he proposed a show of hands vote as to whether the group believed Pons and Fleischman's results were real. The vote went 8 to 1 against. When he asked the same question about his own work, the vote was better. 6 in his favor, 3 against. His neutron rate of just 2 per hour was so low, some thought he had just measured a cosmic ray burst and was deluding himself. Others found his presentation tacky, a chance to grandstand with Pons and Fleischman being absent. He even showed off his legally notarized logbook pages, which made him seem more interested in patent rights than figuring out any scientific truth.
Some of the physicists who've heard Jones use that analogy say they don't think the sprout is a tree or a flower. They think it's a weed.
This was still the Pons and Fleischman show, and Jones's attempts to redirect the spotlight were frustrating. The APS conference threw a wet blanket all over Washington.
Today, White House Chief of Staff John Sununu was supposed to meet with U of U fusion chemist Stanley Pons, but Sununu canceled. To top it off, the House Science Committee was supposed to visit Pons' lab next week, but today the committee canceled.
When we look back on the history of this scandal, most point to Nathan Lewis's talk as the fatal blow. But many scientists had already chosen sides by this point. In an audience of mainly physicists, he was just reinforcing a view that many of them already believed. He wasn't the first to come out against, nor was he the most famous or even the most vocal. His presentation, while more interesting than your typical academic talk, would quickly bore the average person. Maybe part of it is that it feels satisfying in a dramatic sense. Here came a fellow electrochemist, willing to speak out against 2 of his peers. By the end of the night, CNN was running the story, and the tide was beginning to turn.
Scientists meeting in Baltimore have declared cold fusion studies at the University of Utah dead.
I think it's improbable in the Jones case, but not impossible. I believe that it's impossible in the Utah case. Either there's some secret ingredient or some uncontrolled variables that they're not telling us about, or B, that it's wrong. and I put my bets on the latter right now.
The number of experiments that have been done in the University of Utah is very few. I mean, it's incredible in 5.5 years have done so little.
Tens of millions of dollars are at stake, dear sister and brother, because some scientists put a thermometer at one place and not another.
The Times remarked, the government would do better to put the money on a horse.
Whether you want to attribute it to Baltimore or the public's short attention span, media decided that as of early May, cold fusion fever was over. Lewis's talk was held on May 1st. This graph of articles on a week-by-week basis shows that there was a massive plummet the week following the conference. And despite a small spike the week after, interest had died by June and would never recover.
It hit the cover of Business Week, Time and Newsweek in the first week of May '89, and I was told that this was the first time the same story had been on the front cover of all these since Kennedy's assassination.
This is the last time cold fusion will receive this level of mainstream spotlight. Only local Utah media will continue to cover it with any consistency. But as one physicist said at the time, the corpse of cold fusion will probably continue to twitch. I don't think he realized just how bang on he was. Hey, are you dying?
Wait, this is part 2? What the fuck's part 1 then? Oh.
Big thank you to Nebula for sponsoring this video.
I missed this apparently. I guess I'm watching part 1 after part 3. Or part 2.
Utah, 1869. Promontory Summit. Located in the Great Plains almost 70 miles from Salt Lake City. It is the site of a moment in history. The last spike in the first transcontinental railway is being hammered in. There is media abound. Railway Baron Leland Stanford has the honor of hammering in that final spike. The moment he swings that hammer, a message is sent out across the telegraph network. Done. Except he misses his swing. It doesn't matter though. The spike is for show. A hole had already been dug and the spike was placed into it beforehand. It's also not even full of gold. It was iron painted with gold. And besides, right after the famous photograph was taken, they would remove it and put a regular one in after. People would just steal it otherwise. The golden spike is a symbol of the completion of a monumental task. The meeting of two industrial titans whose work cost millions and produced an engineering marvel that connected the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans with one final leg. A celebration of rival companies and the backbreaking labor of thousands of immigrants. It's the moment that made it into the history books, because it made for one hell of a photo. 120 years later, and just 64 miles to the southeast, a new Golden Spike ceremony is playing out once again. But instead of the Great Plains, we're at the Salt Lake City airport, in a FedEx office. There is a camera crew here. They're filming a grad student, Marvin Hawkins, and he's clutching an envelope. Inside it is the most important paper of his career. He's waiting for someone who will never show up. They had an agreement that they would submit their papers at the same time, back to back, a show of good faith. Marvin doesn't realize it yet, but he's just an unfortunate pawn about to be trampled in a much larger dispute. In about a month, he'd be fired, just months away from getting his PhD. The people he's waiting for right now had no interest in playing pretend nice for the media. This was war now. This was more than a potential Nobel Prize. Their discovery was the solution to the world's energy crisis, the key to eliminate the world's dependence on oil, the resource that was slowly killing the planet. Just days ago, Exxon Valdez had caused the largest oil spill in history off the coast of Alaska. The timing was almost prophetic. Today is Good Friday. Salvation was here, and it had been discovered in Utah. It was time to spread the good word. Utah is not exactly the first place you think of when you hear about a scientific breakthrough. Let's be honest here, your mind almost certainly went to the Church of Latter-day Saints. The state was founded by the controversial religious group where they searched for a promised land to make their own, and they fought with the federal government for decades before they were eventually accepted into the Union. Notably, only after the church publicly disavowed their former tradition of polygamy. And throughout the 20th century, Utah as a state craved legitimacy in the eyes of the rest of the nation. The state spent years building up their image as something more than just the home of the Mormons. Their national parks and ski resorts attract millions of tourists each year. Now iconic films have made their premiere there at Sundance. They lobbied for almost 20 years to host the eventual 2002 Winter Olympics. But for every success, there would be a Utah story making national news for all the wrong reasons. In the 1980s, there were the deadly Salt Lake City bombings of Mark Hoffman. Another was a shootout with police involving an illegal family of polygamists. The issue was summed up by a local political pundit. If you ask a lot of people in Utah what they fear, it's that everyone is going to laugh at us. We want money, and we want respect. We would very much like to be respected, not as Nevada is for gambling or Wyoming for coal, but for brains and for talent. Despite its perception as a bit of an intellectual backwater, in the 90s, Utah had the second highest rate of high school graduates that went on to higher education. It's home to plenty of great schools, with the top two locked in an eternal rivalry with each other. Brigham Young University, located in Provo, is owned and operated by the Mormon Church, and it enforces a draconian and regressive honor code. But it has a good reputation in the field of engineering and nursing. And then there was BYU's longtime football adversary, the top school in the state, the University of Utah, or the U for short. An all-around good research institute, its genetics program was respected all across the country, and it was also the birthplace of the now iconic Utah teapot, the benchmark of 3D modeling. And its chemistry department was no slouch either, ranked within the top 20 in the country. One Utah resident wanted to improve those rankings, and he was going to do everything he could to earn his state the respect he felt it deserved, even if it cost him his job. Chase Peterson, like most people from the state, was a Mormon, although he was not a fanatical one. He had spent most of his early career out east, and got a medical degree from Harvard, and eventually became the dean of admissions. But his home state beckoned to him, and he eventually returned, becoming the president of the University of Utah in 1983. His time out east had taught him how to rub elbows with the wealthy and attract donors, skills he would desperately need as U of U was facing a period of steep decline. State education budgets were being slashed each year as Utah's whole economy slowed, and that meant that Peterson had to cut his school's budget 8 times in just as many years. If he wanted money, he either had to convince the government he deserved it, or he had to make friends in the private sector, and the way you go about that is by making headlines. Back in 1972, a U of U chemist announced that he had invented the first ever X-ray laser. After much excitement, no other labs could reproduce it, and it became jokingly known as the Utah effect. What Peterson needed was another one of those, but real this time. His first real time in the national spotlight was when U of U doctors implanted the first ever artificial heart into a man named Barney Clark. Clark had long suffered from severe heart problems and was going to die without medical intervention. It was a groundbreaking surgery, and 70 reporters came from all over the globe to cover it. It was an intense 6-hour procedure, and Clark had severe complications, including seizures and breathing problems. Unfortunately, he died in hospital 112 days later. Although clearly a step forward, it was not a success. Clark was intended to live much longer. The Utah effect had struck again. But despite the failure, Chase Peterson's handling of the announcement was positively received. He was a calm voice of reason who had a clear handle on sharing complex topics with the world, and he had high ambitions. His name was floated in political circles, potentially as a Democratic candidate for Senate. One more solid announcement, and he could maybe think about planning his next moves. It was just a matter of time until someone at the U came up with a real break. And that was in late 1988. Peterson learned of this project through bits and pieces. It was apparently highly confidential. Even a whisper of it getting to the wrong person could jeopardize it. It was something supposedly world-changing. 2 professors in the chemistry department had been working on something for years in secret. The administration first got wind of it,
There.
they submitted a funding proposal to the Dean of Science, Hugo Rossi. Rossi had read it, but the implications didn't click until he woke up in the middle of the night. The first thing he did the next morning was call the scientist and ask quite bluntly, "Are you building a bomb?" And the answer he got was, quote, "Well, I suppose you could put it that way." It was not, in fact, a bomb. But Washington would soon be paying close attention anyway. The lab in which this discovery had taken place had been working 24/7 for almost the past month, desperate to get as much data as possible before the announcement. Now, Peterson was having secret trustee meetings where everything was locked down. Leaks would be devastating. No one was allowed to use the actual words to describe the breakthrough. It was referred to simply as the F word. Although secrecy was of the utmost importance, Peterson was rumored to have spoken to the governor of Utah in late 1998 and told him that his school may soon win a Nobel Prize. On March 13, 1989, the school filed its first patent.
Hi.
First of several. By March 16th, Peterson called an emergency meeting with all their lawyers.
Is the game frozen or something?
Scientists. Peterson and the lawyers were in agreement. The
It
time
is.
was now.
Okay.
If they waited any longer,
I didn't know.
it would jeopardize the
Oh
patent.
shit, it's been frozen for like
The
5
two
minutes.
scientists, however, are
Okay,
reluctant.
well, there I
After a
fixed
long
it.
argument, they are slowly swayed. They realize the gravity of the situation. Years later, Peterson will argue that if they had stood their ground, he wouldn't have forced them to hold the press conference. And yet, the recollection of another attendee was that one of the two scientists was on the verge of tears. Whatever the case, the decision had been made. The press conference was scheduled for 1 p.m. Mountain Time, March 23rd, 1989. The media was given just a single day advance warning. Campus security is deployed around the chemistry department, locking down access to the basement lab where all of this had started. The room is packed. TV crews capture the whole thing, which will last for a little over half an hour. This is a moment in history.
First, let's get the news of that scientific breakthrough at the University of Utah. Brian?
Lead story. Thanks very much, Carol and Keith. Good afternoon, everyone. In about an hour, researchers at the University of Utah are scheduled to make an announcement that they revolutionize the way we energize our world.
Chase Peterson and his VP, James Brophy, welcomed the journalists to the talk. Peterson, knowing full well his words would broadcast across the country, makes sure that everyone knows this discovery happened at his school.
This university prides itself, whether it be in creative writing, or dance, or chemistry, or genetics, or artificial organs.
Why is he playing terrorist? He's already beaten that. Okay.
Of intellectual freedom, intellectual excitement, and a willingness to try new ways to solve old problems. Those minds and that knowledge are then dedicated to the benefit of the people of the world generally and to the cultural and economic well-being of the state of Utah specifically.
Next, the mic is handed over to our first protagonist, Stanley Pons.
Well, first of all, let me thank Dr. Peterson, Dr. Brophy for the kind introduction, and further for their strong encouragement and support throughout this entire project. The experiment we have accomplished has been described in the news release which you have, and I'll just give you a brief synopsis, and that it's basically we've established a sustained nuclear fusion reaction by means which are considerably simpler than conventional techniques. Deuterium, which is a component of heavy water, is driven into a metal rod, similar, exactly like the one that I have in my hand here, to such an extent that fusion between these components, these deuterons, in heavy water, are fused to form a single, a new atom. And with this process, there is a considerable release of energy, and we've demonstrated that this could be sustained on its own. In other words, much more energy is coming out than we're putting in.
That was a lot of words. The most important ones were these. Quote, sustained nuclear fusion reaction, and considerably simpler than conventional techniques. And then finally, much more energy is coming out than we're putting in. Pons then turns to his partner, Martin Fleischmann, and asks him if he wants to add anything.
And he has really described the experiment. It is very simple. You drive the deuterons into the lattice, you compress the deuterons in the lattice, and under those circumstances, we have found conditions where fusion takes place and can be sustained indefinitely. Now, indefinitely is an emotive word. We have run experiments for hundreds of hours, and on our time scale, that is a pretty long time.
Again, there's that phrase, quote, very simple. Following this, Pons explains why they think this can only be fusion.
Well, first of all, the heat that we then measure can only be accounted for by nuclear reactions. The heat is so intense that it cannot be explained by any chemical process that is known.
They have some additional evidence, too.
The other evidence is, of course, that we have direct measurements of neutrons by measuring the gamma radiation which builds up in a tank where one of these cells is under operation. We can measure, have a gamma ray spectrum. In addition, there is a buildup of tritium in the cell, which we measure with a scintillation counter.
Radiation. Again, a clear sign that this is a nuclear effect.
I would think that it would be reasonable within a short number of years to build a fully operational device that can produce electric power or drive steam.
I did 49 to 93 today.
Wow.
I know.
Oh my god.
Maybe someday I'll actually manage to do 49 to 100 because it seems to be the most impossible run to ever perform. I have 8 runs left to go, and then I'm done for today.
Nearly done.
Yeah. I haven't played the beginning of the wave, like the first wave, in a bit too long, so now it's taking me 5 billion years to do runs here. It's actually 250. Yes. Wait, and Kat, are you home?
What do you mean?
Okay, yeah, you are home. Nah, I for some reason I was like, wait, did he like join on his mobile device or like? Because I already forgot which mic you were talking to. I don't know.
Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
But you already knew that.
Knew what? That I have Alzheimer's? Yeah, obviously. I am slowly closing in on 250,000 attempts. It hurts.
That's crazy.
Nah. I'm at 248k right now.
250k today.
No. I'm gonna stop playing soon.
2k attempts isn't much.
And that's like 2 hours of playtime with my consistency. Also, I'm 5 runs away from the end. Also, I was streaming earlier, and so my space and virtual fucking appeared in my stream, right? And apparently my stream chat broke, and I did like 49 to 93, right? That was when I did the run. And then I like tab out, and I'm like, damn, that was a good run. And so my space and virtual in chat are like, what the fuck, God. They watched my best run of the stream. When will you see one of my best runs of the streaming, Cat?
I have no idea.
Nope. There's a notification for 2 hours. Damn, I almost finished in less than 2 hours, but I was just a tad too slow. Well, that's assuming it doesn't take me like 2
can't
hours.
watch streams because of my...
Oh, yeah, fair point. I think I'm gonna end the stream. I'll finish up the 5 runs on my own.